Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I grew up on a small rural farm in Paris Township near Kenosha, Wisconsin. I remember several things occurring from 1987 when we moved to the farm until the summer of 1994 when I left for college. These incidents cover that time period, however, I can't recall the exact dates. Much of this I thought of as a dream until Facebook came along and an old friend contacted me saying something like, "Hey, do you remember? Face in the window." It was around New Year's and my parents were away from the house at a party. My brother was at a friend's and I had a friend over to work on a 10-page government report due when we got back from winter break later that week. I'd guess the incident occurred at around 9 p.m. and probably between December 30th and January 1st. I was likely a sophomore or junior in high school, so it would have been either 1991 or 1993. There was a large front porch on the front of our house, and due to it being winter we never used the front door because the front of the house faced field and the wind would sweep snow drifts onto the porch. So we always used the side door which led to the driveway. However, if you stand on the porch near the front door, there was a picture window looking into our dining room, and at the end of the dining room was a large desk with a computer. My friend had just finished the paper. We both stood up at the same time and turned toward the window. Staring at us from the window was a face. I recall it being whitish, gray, and it seemed as if the skin was smooth like warm candle wax. Its head was longer than a human's and slightly more bulbous, but not in an exaggerated way. Its eyes were dark and maybe 3 or 4 times the size of a typical human's. While the description sounds like a stereotypical gray alien, it also seemed different. In fact, different enough for me to think it was something else other than an Ed until recently. Anyway, it was staring, and in the few seconds I saw it, I remember feeling as if it wanted to hurt me, was upset with me, or needed to get to me and was upset it couldn't. I didn't hear anything, and I remember thinking that those were feelings I felt deliberately from this creature. It wasn't fear, although I was terrified. About the same time that my friend and I dove to the floor, I saw the creature turn its head and run toward the driveway. From my position, he ran to the left. After about 5 minutes, my friend and I had convinced ourselves that what we'd just seen was a neighbor messing around with some kind of a mask. However, when I walked my friend out to his car, we realized that there were no footprints in the snow, and there was snow everywhere from the porch to the driveway. I don't recall ever seeing the creature again. In my early 30s, Facebook came around. By this time, even though I vividly remembered that night, I started to think it might have been a dream. One day I received a message from my friend after connecting on Facebook. One of the first things he said to me was,
"Hey, do you remember that night at your house when we saw that thing?"
Lights at night. I think this incident occurred before I was in high school, so it was probably between 1987 to 1990. Our closest neighbors with kids lived a quarter-mile down the road, and one of the kids was camping with me and maybe my brother in our side yard, which was about a half-acre piece of land. Behind our 3-car detached garage, and then bordered on the side by 2 large grain bins at least 20 feet tall and an old barn. I woke up in the middle of the night because I saw a really bright light shining into our tent. At first, I thought maybe a farmer had pulled up near the barn to turn around and had their bright lights shining on the tent. I wanted to see who it was, so I crawled out of the tent, and as soon as I was out of the tent, the light was gone. It wasn't like someone pulled away or even flipped the lights off. It just wasn't there. So, I got outside and walked onto the road and didn't see any cars. It was really dark outside and I was heading back to the tent. But, before I got to the tent, I saw several bright spherical lights. If I had to estimate, I'd say they were between a softball and a bowling ball in size. There were several colors, although right now I only recollect red and yellow. Initially, they were hovering above me in the tent, about as high as the grain bins. Then they began to move. Sometimes they were in a circular pattern, and then sometimes 3 would form a triangle maybe 5 to 6 feet long. I don't recall how many lights there were, but I want to say it was around 5. So, they would be in the triangle or circle formation and then suddenly break from each other and just move randomly all over the place, always above me, but in a lot of directions, before going back to their pattern together. That's all I remember, and always thought it was a dream. It never occurred to me that the incident wasn't a dream until Facebook again, when this kid contacted me and asked if I remember the night we were camping in my yard and saw those strange lights by the old barn and bins. I knew he had been camping with us, but I don't recall him seeing the lights with me, which was especially haunting for me. Time loss. My friend and I were hanging out at my house. It was about noon and we were talking about something and decided to go for a walk down the street. We would have said up the hill and back. There was a dip in the road and then the road went up a hill. We would often walk it when we were bored or talking about something. This was probably the same time period as the lights, between 1987 and 1990, and it was in the summer because I remember wearing a t-shirt. My dad asked us where we were going, and I told him just up the hill and back. He said not to be gone for too long, although I don't remember why. He and I walked up the hill and back. It was at most 15 minutes. But when we got back, my dad was furious and said he was about to call the police since we'd been gone so long. Had he not looked so mad, I would have thought he was joking. Then he said my friend had to get home because either his grandma or mom was freaking out and kept calling. I used to wear a watch back then and looked at it. Only about 15 minutes passed, so I was even more confused, but when I got inside the house, all the clocks were almost 4 hours later than my watch. I remember going up and down the hill countless times that summer with my friend trying to figure out what happened, and neither of us could. Thinking about it, that was probably the summer of 1989 or 1990 because my friend and I stopped hanging out shortly after that. Flashing lights. It was nighttime, probably around 9 p.m. in the summer. I can't recall which year, but probably 1989 or 1993. I was with friends, but I can't recall who. What I do remember is looking off toward the north, probably about 85 degrees off the horizon to directly above us, and we could see flashing in the sky. They looked like exploding fireworks without noise and without streaming. The lights were all white and only looked like a quick explosion. My friends and I ruled out fireworks because except for the visual explosion, there was nothing similar. Plus, they were so high in the sky and they were about the size of the stars before they exploded and moved. We could actually see what looked like a star, then it would explode, but also seemed to move to another area of the sky and explode again, move to another area of the sky and explode again. They continued in these strange moving patterns for what seemed like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes. The next day I described it to my dad, who said it must have been the aurora borealis, which was sometimes viewable, but nothing like this. Since then I have searched online and haven't been able to find anything like it. I only recall seeing this once. Dreams. Along with these incidents, I also had a series of dreams, which unto themselves I wouldn't think were anything more than dreams. In fact, until I started thinking about the old farm recently, I still just thought they were dreams. However, after listening to an audiobook on alien abduction, I thought I would at least mention them. For transparency, I should say that as a kid I did believe in UFOs and ETs. I wasn't obsessed, but if I saw something on TV I'd watch it and occasionally look at the sky hoping to see something. I only remember fragments of the dreams. The thing that made these dreams different from other dreams is I always woke up somewhere outside my bed and often outside of our house. One example is a dream I had about a UFO that was on the ground in our driveway. It was more of a pod of some sort and saucer-shaped. It might have been only 10 feet wide, and I remember thinking that it was way too small for me or anything else to fit inside. It was probably only 3 to 4 feet at its longest from top to bottom. I remember a typical gray alien of some kind, but I don't remember our contact as much as I remember it being irritated with me for doing something. But I don't know what. It wasn't mad, but more like a parent is irritated with a toddler. At some point, the saucer was flying around and I was with it, but then it was on the ground again and I was left on the ground. When the dream was over, I woke up alone on our driveway in the middle of the night. Another dream I recall was something about these hooded creatures and a tall, uncloaked figure in my bedroom at night. I woke up because I was floating, but unable to control anything. I could only see and hear. The sound I heard was a light droning or humming. My legs began moving through the bedroom wall that led to the back of our house and toward the farm fields. The next thing I recall is walking by myself in the middle of the night along a trail. Our farm had our house, behind that was a field and then a large garden, the animals, pigs, cows, goats, the beehives, and then a large soybean field we rented to other farmers. I was toward the back end between the beehives and the pigs. I only remember this because the pigs' grunting seemed to wake me up while I was walking. I remember dreams of a figure in my bedroom doorway multiple times, as well as the feeling of moving without seeing anything. Other places I woke up were at the bottom of the stairs alongside the bookcase, front porch, and several times outside, often behind the garage and near the grain bins where I had seen the colored orbs.
I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin, about 45 minutes from Chicago, and I also saw a huge bird-like creature a few weeks ago. Me, my brother, and my neighbor were in my backyard when suddenly a massive bird appeared overhead. It had a wingspan of, I estimate, about 10 or 15 feet. It was much larger than any bird I have ever seen. Big enough to snatch my 2-year-old daughter off the ground, maybe even me. It flew very majestically and very slowly. It seemed surreal. And the strange thing is, just as soon as it appeared overhead, it vanished before my eyes. I was very well expecting to see this creature fly off in the distance, but it just vanished after about 10 seconds. My brother confirmed my sighting. Me and my neighbor had been drinking, but my brother was sober as a judge. He saw the exact same thing. It appeared and disappeared right before our eyes. My neighbor said he thought it was a bat, but it was much too big and flew too slow to be a bat. Whatever it was, it is not known by modern science.
I live in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where werewolves have been sighted for centuries. I was walking back in May 2017 around 3 a.m. to a girlfriend's house. When I was close to her street, I looked behind a house with an alleyway in the back. I saw, at first, what I thought to be a big deer, but when I looked closer, it was a big humanoid creature bent down sniffing. It turned its head. It was a wolf head. It was big. So I looked even closer. It was a wolf-like man on two legs, bent down. It was huge. I ran down the street because I did not want to get its attention. In my mind, I wanted to go back, but something told me not to.
In roughly the winter of 1998 or 1999, I was driving out of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin on Highway 50. If I recall, that is the name of the main road out of town towards Kenosha. When I noticed a long ship, that was a straight line with a bright white light on each end and one in the middle. I didn't think much of it at first, although I did continue looking at it because it didn't resemble a plane in shape. A straight line like a cigar or something, and the lights looked different. I began to really pay attention when I turned off Highway 50 onto the side road that leads to my subdivision. I can't recall the county road, but it leads to Tuscany, the subdivision I was living in at the time. The craft was originally headed parallel to the highway, traveling in the direction towards Kenosha and away from Lake Geneva as I was, but when I turned 90 degrees onto the side road, the craft changed direction 90 degrees as well. I took note because aircraft don't turn 90 degrees like that. The aircraft seemed to follow me change in direction, and to be descending to lower altitudes and getting closer. I remember slowing down to basically a crawl in my vehicle to watch the craft, and as crazy as this may sound, the next thing I remember is coming to standing outside my car, behind the rear bumper. Driver's side door was open, no recollection of getting out of the car, and now the large ship I had seen before is gone, and there is a much smaller triangle-sized ship hovering maybe 20 feet at most over the road and maybe 20 feet away horizontally. It was completely silent, a white light on each corner of the triangle and an orange or yellow light. It's been 16 years, hard to remember everything. I freaked out and jumped in my car and took up as fast as I could. Looking back in my rear and side view mirrors, the triangle craft was gone, but the large cigar-type craft that I had previously viewed, but that was nowhere in sight while I observed the triangle craft, was back up in the sky and was again traveling parallel to my car. I made another 90 turn into my subdivision of the side road and the craft did so as well. I made another 90-degree turn off the first road in my subdivision onto the second one. The one on which I lived, Sienna Circle, and again the craft changed direction with me. I ran into side as fast as I could. Upon entering the house, I looked out every window I could in each direction and saw neither ship. I proceeded to write down the entire event and eventually fell asleep. The next morning my girlfriend stopped by before school as she typically did, and as soon as I woke up I excitedly started to tell her of the previous night's event. She told me to calm down and that I had been dreaming, reminiscing me I just woke up. I told her I wasn't dreaming it to look on my dresser where I had written it all down. That was until maybe 6 months later I was in Kenosha at a friend's house. He was late returning and I began to worry about him and was looking out his back door towards the main road anxiously awaiting his return. That is when I noticed a small triangle craft. Exactly like the one I saw before, hovering maybe 20 feet off the ground, not making a sound, and coming slowly, very slowly towards the house. It flew across the backyard straight towards me and I called the other woman there who was there to come look, and she too saw it in amazement. We watched it for a few minutes as it slowly approached the house, flew over it barely over the rooftop and proceeded across the street. Upon being directed above the house across the street, it changed direction 90 degrees and slowly hovered over all the houses on the opposite side of the street until it was out of sight. I kept this mostly to myself for the last 16 years because, A, I have no proof and, B, most people don't believe you or don't care. After seeing report after report and pic after pic of similar triangle ships, I figured I'd go ahead and report mine too for whatever it's worth.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.